Hey folks, how are you guys doing today? Welcome. My name is Andrew Hill. I will be your neuroscientist for the evening. If it's evening for you, it might be morning. Maybe you're watching this tomorrow, which would be cool. Let's see, I've got a microphone, I've got video, can turn off the countdown. How's everyone doing today? I see a few folks trickling in. Say hello, let me know how your day's going. Tonight I wanted to talk about aging a little bit. I know we go back and forth on different topics, and generally the goal is to help give people agency, give people perspective over their brains, understanding how things work. And so while I often do neurofeedback focused topics, I thought tonight I would do two things. One, talk about a paper that shows that if you listen to music, it may actually spare you from dementia. Now, it's a correlation, not a causation, but the effect is pretty significant. And there's a couple other interesting twists about that music feature, things it seems to interact with, that I want to show you later on, or tell you about later on. And then I did want to talk about an EEG metric. There's been a new finding showing that you can actually distinguish flavors of dementia using EEG signatures, which is pretty great. Now, for years, there's been some perspective on using SPECT or other forms of neuroimaging, especially for billing purposes on insurance forms. But this is some of the first well-validated EEG perspective we're seeing, which is pretty great. Radar Ashwood, hello, Radar. Nice to see you today. How you doing? So yeah, new insights tonight into aging, music's impact on dementia, and brainwave clues for early detection of dementia. So this paper came out recently, and it was a huge study. Emma Jaff and colleagues in the Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry. Over 10,000 adults aged over 70 were followed for several years. So we call this a longitudinal study, looking at time happening and how people change over time. Let's see, here's a question. Does having the linked ears button on mean anything when training one-channel designs? Oh, Radar Ashwood's asking about a neurofeedback protocol setup. Radar, depending on the amplifier you have, it can. Most amps are smart enough to ignore a second reference that's not plugged in if you check off the linked ears. Like on the Wiz, it generally will be ignored if you leave the second socket empty. Good question. Back to dementia and music. Now, it sounds almost magical, but recent studies suggest that engaging with music, especially listening regularly, and I'll get back into what that means in a second, but listening to music regularly is linked to substantially lower dementia risk in these older adults. So again, over 10,000 people, age 70 plus, were followed for several years, and they grouped them and found that of those people, those that always listened to music had a 39% lower chance of developing dementia compared to those who listened rarely or never. So sometimes, rarely, never, and always. In the always group, 39% reduced risk. Crazy high. Now, is this selective bias? Does getting dementia make you less interested in music? Probably not, actually. That was my first thought when I saw the abstract of this paper. And we know that's true, actually. You can develop pretty significant dementia of the Alzheimer's type and other type and still actually respond to music that you know well. If you've been a musician, you may still retain the ability to play music even though you don't know that you do fully. So music seems to be persistent to some extent. But here, we're showing that if you have a habit maybe of listening to music all the time, it correlates at least with something that prevents dementias, which is interesting at the very least. So I thought that was a paper worth talking to you about. But there's a few other things in the paper that jumped out. Now, what about making music? What about being a musician? Right? I mentioned that a minute ago, how that can be a spared feature sometimes in advanced aging or dementia. But in this same study, older adults who frequently played a musical instrument, so 39% for listening all the time, but what if you play? 35% if you play. So if you do both, you had some, crossed overlap that was about the same. So let's see. Oh, I see. So the 35% is regardless of listening. So the always listening was 39%. But if you frequently play, that's 35%. And if you did both regularly listen, not frequently, but regularly, and played, 33%. So there's these different effects. Whenever the large amount of music listening or producing is brought on board, there's this reduction of effect. So I think it probably has something to do with plasticity and information flow, but it also must have something to do with laterality, because music is one of the very few things that requires both hemispheres of the brain to process. I mean, most hearing does, but definitely to produce music requires a whole brain sort of phenomenon, and really to appreciate music in time and rhythm and prosody and lilt and meaning. It's a whole brain phenomenon. Very, very few things are. So I wonder if it's a cross-hemisphere or an intrahemispheric integration thing. So very eye-opening numbers. It's almost as if this music engagement creates some sort of cognitive reserve, a topic that, you know, kind of like your body's metabolic reserve, developing muscle mass and good muscle, good bone density can prevent the ravages of aging if you sort of lay information into the bank, or sorry, resource into the bank with muscle and bone density. It looks like we've seen some research on meditation, on other forms of healthy aging, or things you can add to healthy aging, and we see the same kind of effect. But here it looks like music may be at least as impactful as meditation, which is pretty impressive. So this was an Australian study. I don't think this is anything particular about Australians. Thousands of participants who were dementia-free at baseline, so they were not symptomatic, and then tracked their cognitive health for 5 years. So more music equals better cognitive outcomes across the study. Really crazy. And those who had music in their lives, who did have dementia had lower dementia rates overall. And they performed better on other memory tasks and global cognitive tasks. So it's not just dementia. So, hey, Dama Vicious, yeah, music activates the whole brain. There's a great book on this by Daniel Levitin, Music and the Brain, or Your Brain on Music. I'll find a link after the show, and I'll put it in the notes below for folks who are watching later. But yeah, music is a very special phenomena in terms of brain laterality. I mean, there's very little in the brain in general, in the body in general, that you have to do both at once on both sides. And the ears are like that. You know, each cochlear wires to both sides of the brain, through the brainstem, through the olivary nuclei, so that you can compare the information as it comes through, and the olivary nuclei can sort of see in timing when the information hits, and that way you know where things are coming from. And unlike many other things in the body, again, sensory systems and perceptive systems, the ears never stop transducing sound into the brain. We never stop processing it. So it's a very expensive, very heavily balanced phenomenon that requires both sides of the brain. And then, you know, even if you're not a musician, think about something simpler like speech. Speech has meaning, you know, the meaning of my language right now, but it also has prosody. It has lilt. You can tell that I'm in a good mood. I'm kind of happy. Or you can tell that I'm kind of angry. And those are phenomena that are lateralized. So the meaning is often considered to be left, superior parietal, sort of Wernicke's area, and the right is more of the nonverbal, the prosody, the lilt, the meaning. We also do things like face expression and the meaning of emotions on that right-hand side. It's all very tied together, the sensory world coming in there behind the ears. So it looks like activating those tissues, those temporal lobe tissues, all the way through those sensory systems must do something. And making music is also a motor control and a motor patterning and motor learning phenomena. And so I'm reminded of, again, the sparing effect of music. And this can be true, as we're seeing, it can prevent dementias, but even in people that develop significant physical illness. I mentioned elders that have some significant memory impairment will still remember how to play the piano or sing along with their favorite songs or something often. But you can also see the other phenomena when you're cognitively intact and you're an elder and you're stiff and tired, maybe really ill, and music comes on that you know, or if you're a musician, body transforms. So I was at a show, I don't remember when it was probably 25 years ago, maybe longer. A musician, a drummer, Babatunde Alatunde, one of his last shows he did. He's a West African drummer, and a lot of teaching to the West as well. So I was really influenced by him. I was very excited to see him. Little old man, little elderly man walks out, It's two giant hulking men on either side supporting him, holding him by the elbows. One's carrying a big giant drum for him. And they got him up in front of the microphone. He didn't even have a microphone. It was just a bare stage in Boston, in Cambridge, in one of the big church halls that has good resonance. And they hand him the drum, and you have to strap these things on with big straps. He's kind of fidgeting with it. And he's, little tiny man. I think he had kidney failure at that point, so he was very ill. And he gets sort of all set, and then he sits up and just transformed. And suddenly he's this powerful 30, 40 years younger man who's just controlling a giant room of, several hundred people with one instrument, filling it, impressing everyone. And he left the stage with that same bounce in his step and the upright walk and not needing assistance as well. So he gave himself to that music even right up until the end of his life. And it was something we could see transform him in real time. So just as an aside, it's not as simple as make music and avoid dementia. Making music may be something you get to keep and give for the rest of your life if you start doing it. So I really encourage you guys to learn how to make music if you don't. It's pretty magical if you haven't gotten into it yet. All right, as an aside, a little bit of a tangent there. Hope you guys appreciated. Hey, Jehan, nice to see you. Did the correlation change with specific genres of music? I don't think that was mentioned in the paper. Good question. So the one correlation was making music had its own impact. Listening more had more of an impact. We also saw education. If you segmented the groups of people, the 10,000 out, you found that those that had high education, 16 plus years of education, in that subgroup, those that also always, quote unquote, listened, had a 63% risk reduction. Now, that's crazy. It's almost 2/3. We do know there is evidence that advanced education does prevent or predict a reduced incidence of dementias and some other diseases of aging. It does appear like activating your brain, storing lots of complex information gives you lots of information, things to hang on to in the future. But in this combination effect, this interaction between always listening, quote unquote, and having high education. So stay in school, kids, and rock out when you're doing it. You got to fight for your right to party. That's my high school, to give you some sense of how old I am. All right, so pretty crazy effects. Demo Vicious, do you like Tame Impala? I do a little bit. I've only heard a couple of their songs. I think they're a little bit like, I'm old, dude, like I've heard of them, but I'm like 20 years older than that, so all my stuff's old. So really, really interesting effect here. And we don't know why there's an interaction between, when you see a variable like that in statistics, it does not mean that you're just getting additive stuff, that you're getting an effective education and an effect of music, and you add them together. There's actually an interaction of education by, if you will, the effect here. Sorry, there's a loud motorcycle outside. I don't know if you guys can hear it rumbling away. So we do think that the music activates whole brain regions to some extent, like I'm suggesting a full brain workout. I mean, think about it. Listen to your favorite song that's from when you were growing up or in high school or in college. It will completely transport you and activate memory, maybe sensory phenomena, emotional areas, even inspire you in executive frontal areas. Think about which areas are operating. Go through your neuroscience. Those of you who are my students, so to speak, in the Peak Brain Institute have learned about your brain deeply. Think about the different parts of your brain activating when you listen to nostalgic music. Hippocampus for memory, auditory systems, how you're feeling about, what you're focusing on. Think about the different places of the brain that you know about that might be involved there. So, all right. Dang, Dr. Hill, you're a real hipster, says Radar Ashwood. I mean, I'm not sure. I think hipster might be, again, a little bit after me. I'm older than hipsters, dude. I'm a little too over it to be a hipster. Multitasking. Do you ever use music as feedback in neurofeedback? Yeah, sometimes, Jehan. Jehan, do you have a BioExplorer license? I think you do, right? You have a BioExplorer dongle. I will give you a design that I built called Tones. It's an audio-only design that I love. And what it does is it yokes a few different things into the audio It plays at like tubular bells, kind of like wah wah wah, sounds, and they're pitched. I forget what scale I use. It sounds pretty good, like a C scale or a G scale. That's, I believe, major. But what I'm doing with it is I'm changing the amplitude, the volume of the notes, and the length of the notes based on reward characteristics in the raw signal. And so, reward and raw signal characteristics. And so you can run the design, and based on how the auditory is changing, you can kind of lean into your closed eye experiences, or even eyes open, in a way that's kind of similar to alpha theta, but it's not an alpha theta. So Jehan, remind me if you have BioExplorer license, or you want to get one somewhere on the interwebs. You can find one, and I'll get you a copy of that tones design, or ask any of your coaches if you want. Radar Ashwood's asking, what causes tics or Tourette? So a couple things. The anterior cingulate front midline is generally where tics are going to live in an adult anyways. And when I say live, one of the big areas that contributes to the tic is the anterior cingulate selecting what's happening in the moment, what's cognitively happening, holding the moment of thought, selecting from competing thoughts, reconciling the approach versus the avoid, left versus right drive in the frontal areas. And we think that tics often show up there. That's definitely true of things like intrusive thoughts or OCD for obvious reasons, because the anterior cingulate is the sort of CEO in some ways. But in children, you'll see it show up at PZ, in a posterior cingulate. I think it's a maturational thing. I think with alpha speed changes, the source of the failure mode or the dysregulation in the cingulate tissue goes from being visualized more at the back and really truly a failure more, pinch mode more at the back, into one more at the front. And this happens maturationally between age like 7-year-olds with tics. It'll be at PZ generally, but a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, probably more at the front by then. But it's 10 years old, 11 years old, when the brain's dividing with maturational laterality between ages 8 and 11, girls being 8 to 10, boys being 9 to 11, you get a lot of left-right division that really settles in at that point. And that's when you'll often see, as people go through that, the anteriorization of the cingulate activation. Now, if it's a tic, there can be several flavors of tics, not just Tourette's. And yeah, so good question. Radar just asked, is it usually in theta? And yes, it is. Think about the failure modes of tissues. I actually have a couple of videos on this. One is on single versus two channel. It talks about how to localize. I have one about how it's not part of the brain. That one talks about how to localize stuff. But I have I think a pretty deep one on the cingulates, how they scaffold and control aspects of anxiety and attention. So look back at earlier videos for the cingulates to really dig in here. I think I have an OCD video as well, which is related. And those will help a little bit. But yeah, when you have beta, you have more classic OCD with intrusive thoughts or behavior. But when you have theta, things are disinhibited. And so you might get behavioral twitch or eye blinking. You might get songs in your head is super common for having high front midline theta. Biting your nails is also really common, a little behavioral tic like that. Now, Tourette's can just be, quote unquote, as simple as those, at least in the QEEG. But you can also see other phenomena sometimes. And I don't know if this is two different flavors of Tourette's that show up and that look similar, or if this is always Tourette's, or if this is just something else that's like Tourette's. But you'll often see temporal lobe discharges. So there's connectivity between the temporal lobes and the anterior cingulate. And so selecting, and some of the speech things, again, are more temporal. And so you'll get some sort of temporal lobe and front midline yoking and connectivity that produces a discharge. And there's some thought there may be seizure-like phenomena happening there in tics. I'm not sure the literature is really solid on if it's always that, but you will see in individuals medial temporal lobe slowing or even spikes with discharges, face tics, and even vocalizations. So you can see these things as ictal events or seizure phenomena for some people as well. And remember, if your brain is not typical at all, like it's really unusual, really autistic, or super ADHD and anxious, and you're built that way, your chances of having little like sub-threshold, seizure events are actually pretty high. And stabilizing the brain can clean things up. A lot of the mood stabilizers that create benefits in things like bipolar, I think they're doing it because they're actually acting like anticonvulsants, essentially. All right, really off on a tangent here. I appreciate you guys asking questions and honoring my tangent nature. Let me get into the next topic here for you. Let me see other questions waiting. Guy Soleil, can neurofeedback prevent dementia? Not prevent. I've seen it help to offset dementia. I've seen people get some relief. I've seen it be part of a strategy using red light therapy and other metabolic biohacking and have some good effects. I think you can probably prevent it more than address it, but that's because I'm not sure if this has ever been borne out in literature, but you can do things like blood flow training. So you take somebody with CTE and a lot of wear and tear from concussions, and you can do blood flow training and improve plasticity and bring up vascular tone. And I would expect you're helping to make them less prone to dementias. Once someone has any significant symptomology, though, once you've lost significant medial temporal stuff or frontotemporal stuff, it may be hard to recover function. So I'm not 100% sure for symptomatic dementias. I would also encourage somebody who's concerned about that to check out a metabolic biohacking program first. Things like, or along with anything else, things like the Apollo Health Recode program, or if you're young, the Precode program that'll help you find the 37, 38 factors that drive metabolic aging. And you can pull the fuel off the fire and then metabolically biohack with B vitamins and hormones and omega-3s and other things that'll be targeted to your genes and your metabolism. So I would encourage that as a strategy. Neurofeedback may be useful alongside that strategy, especially for specific symptoms like anger, irritability, anxiety, sleep, executive function. The things that neurofeedback works on will work if you're mildly symptomatic, but you're probably not going to offset the symptoms if there's aggressive tissue loss that's continuing. And so again, pull the fuel off the fire with something like the Recode program. So anything else on that music study that I wanted to talk about? Let's see, key findings. There's one other finding, 39% for lower incidence of dementia, but a 17% lower incidence for mild cognitive impairment, MCI, which can be considered a early form of dementia sometimes. It doesn't always progress. There's a study out of NYU, good 20 years ago now, that showed for elders, again, a longitudinal study for elders that presented with memory complaints at NYU's memory clinic. They did QEEGs, and they were followed for, I think it was 8 years. I think it was only about 70 or 80 people, but it was a chunk of people. And they found that the theta-beta ratio that they showed up with predicted decline from MCI into dementia or not. So if you were 60 or 5 or 70 showing up at NYU Memory Center with complaints of memory and you had high theta-beta ratios globally, then you were likely to progress into dementia over the next 8 years. And if you did not have high theta-beta ratios, you were not likely. So does that mean that you could train down your theta-beta ratio and offset the risk of dementia? Maybe, yeah. So it's very complex, it's not one thing. So let me, so 70% lower risk of MCI, playing the musical instrument was 35%, both listening and playing, about a third, and a 22% lower risk of cognitive impairment, MCI. Interesting. Versus people that didn't engage in music or seldom. So Jaffa et al., 2025, International Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry. Cool study, huh? Thanks for doing that research, Jaffa et al. You guys rock. Go find their paper. You know what scientists love? You find their papers on PubMed and you send them emails telling them that their papers were cool or ask them questions about their papers. Scientists love being engaged cognitively and intellectually. You can do it even without a PhD or an academic placement or student role. You can find a paper, pull it, read it, send the author questions. They love that. Seriously, I'm not kidding. This is a cool study. I'm a big fan of this one. All right, so a few other things jumped out to me over the past week or two. One was on EEG, quantitative like EEG. Now I do a lot of EEG. I've shared a lot of EEG images on this channel over the past couple of years. But shifting from melodies to brainwaves, this is more aging research in terms of being predictive, right? Can we see the fingerprints Because if how you treat Alzheimer's, how you treat FTD, frontotemporal dementia, which is more vascular, how you treat Parkinsonian dementias, how you treat LBD, Lewy body dementia, a little bit different. LBD is sort of a Parkinsonian style phenomena, so it's more dopaminergic. Alzheimer's is medial temporal lobe choline tissue, the hippocampus and parahippocampus, and so it's cholinergic. So really different sorts of approaches, modifying dopamine versus acetylcholine. And so you have to know when someone presents with dementia, if they're hallucinating or confused or they have memory issues, you have to kind of know with an elder what's going on. And it's really, really common for elders to show up in ERs and get misdiagnosed as having some senility or dementia, however it's coded. And what it really is not a problem with memory, but it's a problem called delirium. It's usually a fever or some other problem causing short-term brief dysregulation. Very common in people to have delirium, where a little bit of illness, usually very classic case is an elder woman who's got a UTI, and the UTI is causing a fever, and they're getting secondary inflammatory stuff, and they're having short-term memory lapses and a little bit of like hallucinatory stuff going on where they're seeing things. And people come into ERs and they get misdiagnosed as dementia and being given anticholinergics, and it's a big deal. It's a big problem. But delirium will resolve on its own, usually with hydration and getting over the illness, because it's more of a fever. It's kind of like childhood febrile seizures. Yes, they happen and they're scary, but we kind of know why. And this is kind of the other end of that. When you're an elder and the same stress in the brain happens, you get cognitive dysregulation, it looks like, and hallucinations and other kinds of things. But true dementia must always have memory as one of the primary features, and episodic memory is what goes first in these cases, not semantic memory or words, but experiences. So you can really tell that when you're having word finding issues and tip of the tongue happening, and you forget that guy's name over there for 20 minutes, that's not memory. That's actually timing and speed and retrieval and maybe working memory. But true memory features, the hippocampal encoding and retrieval stuff that we lose access to in classic dementias, or the control over those tissues that we lose more frontally in frontotemporal dementias. These are truly memory phenomena. And dementia, the word dementia is a symptom of different diseases, like dementia is a symptom of Alzheimer's. And dementia has with it a memory core primary piece of it. Now, to have Alzheimer's dementia, you have to have a memory issue of episodic memory. You must also have one other symptom. There's several. Very common one is agitation or anger. You start thinking someone's stealing something, or confused about something, and so you confabulate and you get scared by it, and you sort of take it as a threat and get very suspicious. There's several other symptoms that could present as Alzheimer's. Frontotemporal has more mood, more impulsivity because it's more frontal. So you'll see different flavors of dementias that have different symptoms, but they all must have memory as the primary symptom. So if it's not a lasting memory issue, it's not a dementia issue. Let's see. A couple questions here. Radar saying his frontal midline theta has gone down a lot between QEGs. Cool. Notice don't really have Tourette's anymore. Oh, you addressed your Tourette's by training down FMT, front midline theta? Good for you. That's awesome. I addressed aggressive nail biting in my 20s by doing the same thing. How do you train anhedonia? It depends on what you mean by anhedonia. It can be a lot of different things. It can be motivation. It can be a DPDR symptom. It can be dissociative. It can be anxiety. It can be depression. It can be tiredness. It can be slow processing. All those things you would train differently, but look for those things in your QEEG. See what you see. Going after any of those could provide support. Look first at the foundation. Remember, the 3 legs of the stool are sleep, stress, and attention. Make sure those things are okay. Look at your QEEG, look at your experiences, look at your goals. Make sure your sleep, stress, and attention are tracking how you want. As after those are well addressed, then you can do frontal phenomena, maybe alpha theta, maybe trauma work, which would be the attachment work of Sieber and Fisher style. There's different things you can do. But anhedonia is a bit of a it's describing something you're experiencing, but it's not giving me the direction you might have gotten there, because that can be a few different sort of resource pinches that'll produce that phenomena. Maybe simply frontal asymmetry, mild depressive stuff a la Richie Davidson and B. Alan Wallace, etc. So, All right, so back to elders, our wonderful elders. What if we could detect a fingerprint of Alzheimer's, of Parkinson's? What if we could tell them apart? Well, that's what this research seems to show. So it sounds like sci-fi or detective work, a new Fox special. But EEG seems to be showing more promise here. For a long time, of course, EEG has been used in epilepsy and sleep, and QEEG and neurofeedback. But we're starting to uncover EEG signatures that could flag the early stages of dementia. Early diagnosis too, by the way. This is not just diagnosing in terms of distinguishing for active treatment. This is early. So early distinguishment of Alzheimer's from Lewy body dementias really helps, and frontotemporal dementia really helps with addressing the trajectory. Now, backing up for 1 second, 10 years ago, for all the flavors of dementia, we did not really have any trajectory modifying treatments. We had symptom modifying palliative treatments, but nothing that would change the trajectory of decline over time of the disorder, of the disease. Now we're starting to have trajectory modifying. So instead of declining, you have this flattening of decline, the slowing of decline. Now, I've seen this a lot in neurofeedback for Parkinsonian phenomena, a little bit in Alzheimer's type phenomena. So I know we can do something there, but we're seeing now more traditional Alzheimer's and other dementia medications finding ways to change trajectory of decline. And what this will mean is it'll mean more healthy years of life. There's a gerontology term I want to introduce you to called compression of morbidity. Compression of morbidity means you want to slide into your parking spot with your sports car running on its last little bit of fuel, but looking great and feeling amazing, and then it all collapses into its last resting place in the last possible moment. You don't want to spend 30 years dying. You want to die all at once at the end, basically. Compression of morbidity, pushing illness, pushing infirmity, pushing loss of function back into later and later, into the last few months of life, ideally. And we've gotten really good at that in the past 20, 30, 40 years. Our parents are younger than their parents, are younger than their parents at the same age and the same degree of function. It's pretty awesome. But you have some personal responsibility there, and there's many things you can do to flatten trajectories. The diseases of aging around memory, we didn't really have any treatments 10, 20 years ago. 15, 20 years ago. Now we do, and they're starting to see a little bit of trajectory flattening. So the idea that if you can catch the slight dip early on and change the angle of decline, you're very likely to have a much different relationship with aging than you would if you didn't address those phenomena. So I encourage you to think about this as an opportunity, just like do the recode program or something similar to find your metabolic and genetic factors that might drive this. Maybe do one of these tests. You can do a QEEG with me. I'll show you your theta beta ratios and the speed of your alphas and things. It won't tell you why. It won't tell you it's Alzheimer's, but it will tell you that the features are a little bit struggling, and you can work on them regardless of why, which is good. But in this research from a 2024 pilot, so last year, presented at the Alzheimer's Association conference, the scientists recorded EEG from different patients with different dementias. And they found that certain rhythms, certain patterns, the PDR, the alpha's dominant rhythm, basically with the eyes closed, behaves differently depending on the type of dementia. So in healthy brains and early Alzheimer's, there's a well-preserved alpha frequency in the back. The background alpha is there. But in Lewy body dementia, that alpha rhythm can virtually disappear. It sort of gets obliterated, they said. And it's sort of like a radio signal that's lost in the static. The alpha, the index frequency, the idling tone of the brain goes away. And we use this tissue, this alpha, throughout tissues to synchronize and to sort of help us time things. I mean, this is why we notice word finding issues when the alpha gets tired, slower and spread out. But here in Lewy body dementia, the alpha disappears. It just drops out of the background. So the tissue's not well synchronized in a relaxed mode. The study also noticed that Alzheimer's and frontotemporal dementias show a slowing in a way that's different than Lewy body. So the slowing and the power, the strength is also lower in Alzheimer's, but better preserved in frontodementia. So you can see FTD and Alzheimer's, waves slow down, but the power is more preserved in frontotemporal dementia, which, if you know about the physiology, makes sense. FTD is vascular stuff, mostly frontotemporal, and Alzheimer's is medial temporal, and you lose a lot of tissue. Once you're symptomatic, you've lost 20, 30%, 40%, 3/4 of the tissue. And in Parkinsonian dementias, LBD can be specific because the bodies themselves will affect where and what's happening, the degree of glycation in the tissue or oxidative stress in the tissue, affect how the LBDs rip through tissue. But in general, Parkinsonian phenomena in general, you'll see that you do see some slowing, but you also see a lot of dopaminergic phenomena, a lot of high theta phenomena, basically. So, all right, let me stop and answer some questions. Are you into ketosis, ketones for mental stamina, asks Demo Vicious. Sort of, yeah. And for this, that's why I stopped now, actually. You can give somebody with Alzheimer's ketones, exogenous ketones, and you may create cognitive brightening. So one of the phenomena, one of the factors of Alzheimer's specifically seems to be an insulin resistance in neurons, like a type 3 diabetes almost, where the neurons become resistant to feeding on sugars, insulin resistant, and they start going through oxidative stress while starving for fuel, even though there's plenty of fuel around. So not a great environment. And then the sugars basically rust all of the things around them. But even long after neurons become insulin resistant, they are not ketone resistant. The ketone pathway is spared for metabolism. So if you have an elder who is sundowning and becoming more disoriented at 4 and 5 p.m., instead of giving them their snack that they're craving, their carbohydrate snack, give them ketones, exogenous ketones. Stick to ketone esters, perhaps. Again, ask your doctor, ask their geriatrician. But this is what I would do to my elder if I had one handy. I would give them ketones in the afternoon and see if they produced a strong brightening effect. And if they did, I would again do a metabolic screen with a good functional medicine doctor and look for factors to address. But I would also maybe think about having them move into a sort of 80s bodybuilder style diet if they love that way or can be talked into that. If someone's very symptomatic, it's very hard to shift their lifestyle in big ways without it becoming very frustrating and making their quality of life much, much worse. But if someone's mild to moderate, you may be able to let that old guy who's developing dementia eat like an 80s bodybuilder, steak and eggs and, above ground veggies that are fibrous, and no carbs, no starch, no sugar, no juice, nothing with any carbs. And you will develop, endogenous ketone, nutritional ketosis really pretty strongly. Maybe sardine fasting, you can do lots of things to develop a nutritional ketosis. Otherwise, sneak those ketones in shake form or whatever, 1 ounce shot form, when they are on an empty stomach, when they are getting worse, and see what happens. See if you can use them supportively in that way. So in Younger's Demovicious, I think that you can use it for similar reasons. There's evidence that it can support function. I also, though, know a lot of biohackers who start to do basic fasting and other types of, and they have ketones on board. They've measured them, or they're taking exogenous, and they're getting really wired because their cortisol is really high. So you don't necessarily want to throw fuel into your system if you don't need it. And if you're not used to fasting or doing calorie cuts or low carb, high protein or whatever, you'll end up with cortisol surges as the body tries to regulate blood sugar. And that plus ketones can be really uncomfortable or not necessary and do weird things to metabolism and signaling. So I wouldn't rush into exogenous ketones as much as I would encourage somebody who's younger to train their body to produce ketones by playing with intermittent fasting and other types of phenomena there. So Radar's asking, are power and coherence always correlated? No. Usually. Does hypercoherence always mean amplitude is high? It does not. You may see typical amplitude or even low amplitude with high coherence. Not that uncommon, for instance, in somebody who's alcoholic to see high amplitude, high coherence delta, low amplitude delta, for instance. So no, it means different things, of course. Having them both go in the same direction versus different direction. It's kind of a big deal to have them. You normally want to see phase going down and phase lag going down and coherence going up, moving together. And the power will also usually go up when coherence goes up. Not always, but usually. When they move, when those three things don't move together, something weird is happening, and you should figure out why. You should keep looking until you understand what's happening, because it'll be there somewhere. Radar Ashwood, have you ever done neurofeedback on someone with Lewy body disease? I have, yeah. It seems to work a little bit, but once someone's really symptomatic, it's pretty hard. Demovicious, interesting, cortisol's a factor. It is indeed. The cortisol, insulin, vasopressin, melatonin. Think of cortisol, melatonin, insulin as circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm hackers, not or modifiers. Everything is rhythms, guys. You know that? Timing is life. You have to have rhythms. You have to have staccato, intermittent, rhythmic, oscillatory phenomena. Oscillations are where life lives. Be that a living weather system or your living brain. If you get too static, you die. If you go too chaotic, you die. You need rhythms in between the moment of static and chaotic to organize information. And that's also how life works in the brain and the heart. In the heart, you want more coherent information. The brain, you want more actually on the edge of chaos. Brain's on the edge of criticality, the edge of seizure at all times. Kind of like walking requires you to almost fall down and then not. Thinking requires you to almost have a seizure and then not, basically. You need to release the systems, release the hounds, and then pull them back in. So anyways, this EEG study that could distinguish different types of dementia, affordable. Someone can put up with a cap on their head. They might not put up with an infusion, which people can often be sensitive to, or a SPECT scan or a PET scan, radioactive tracers, enclosures. It's also, cost $1,000 to run a magnet. If the MRI machines or PET machines or those sorts of things you have to fill with liquid helium and things like that, those generally cost over $1,000 an hour just to run for the facility. So think about, when you're going into an MRI machine, it's costing the facility $1,000 just to have the machine running for that hour, let alone the staff and all the procedures being done, the analysis being done, just to keep the damn helium running and keep the machine cold and keep the lights on. You don't turn off MRI machines. They're always on 24 hours a day. You can't turn them off unless you're shutting them off, for weeks. I know 2 people who've lost their jobs by turning off MRI machines and having $1 million of helium vented by mistake. Well, one did. One, I think they recovered. They stopped the vent. Anyways, so this 2025 study. Now, I'm probably going to do the name, not going to do the name justice, but it's something like Young Grung Gruneng et al. In Scientific Reports. It's a J name. I think I would assume it's a Y sound. This team used something called EEG connectome analysis, which is kind of like doing multivariate coherence and looking for principal components. It's somewhere in that landscape. It's not exactly either one, but they found that the connections, the phase locking, I think of this as also cross frequency coupling would have shown up had they looked there. But they looked at alpha frequency coupling around 8 to 12 hertz, were weaker across the board in all dementia, but each dementia had its own twist, its own fingerprint. Alzheimer's showed this odd surge in delta band connectivity. So low power, high connectivity. There's your answer right there. Radar for if you can have it. Happened here in this paper. And we had increased complexity in the signal, which is interesting. In the fast frequencies. So maybe it's anxiety is my guess. That's what they were seeing. They're saying hyper synchronized at slow frequencies and chaotic at fast. Yeah. So there's something going on there with tissue loss then if you're having all those slow frequencies. And these differences could be seen by the naked eye, but they were much more obvious when they were fed into some machine learning and did some AI and came back with very strong classifications of FTD, Alzheimer's, and LBD. They classified the groups the individuals successfully 93.6% of the time. And in terms of specific comparisons, Alzheimer's versus healthy or FTD versus healthy with 97% accuracy. And then Alzheimer's versus FTD directly head to head over 97% as well. Again, not that surprising if you know the literature and how medicine's done these days. You can see the difference between FTD and Alzheimer's on a PET scan, for instance, where you give somebody radioactive oxygen or glucose and look at their brain lighting up. So you can see it. I think in that case you'd give them radioactive dopamine probably, although I forget which they use for that test. But in this case, you throw a cap on someone's head and measure for 20 minutes and you'd have the perspective. So this really does validate the idea that we have a lot in our QEEG landscape to look at here. So stuff is life, rhythms, shift happens, get yours. Rhythms are where life is, oscillations where life is. And this alpha rhythm is the core index frequency of the brain. And early Alzheimer's preserves sort of alpha heartbeat, and LBD, loss of that rhythm. And then Alzheimer's and FTD both show a slower dominant brain rhythm. So the posterior dominant, the alpha wave slowed down. And then Alzheimer's also has weaker power of the alpha compared to FTD. So these are sort of distinguishing characteristics in the FTD you can use if you're a neurologist to understand what you're looking at. If you need my help, I'm here. Give me a shout. Our brain mapping is very affordable. Peak Brain has offices all over the US, a few in other countries. And you can do brain mapping with a membership for $250 once a year, unlimited EEGs. So if you're a doctor watching this and you need someone to have an EEG and you need some help understanding how to look at it at a high level, I'm here for you. I won't diagnose spikes or ictal events or, I'll send you to an epileptologist or an EEG-based neurologist if you need some real diagnostic work, but I can show you fatigue and anxiety and other features that are often very telling for doing clinical work. So if you need some support as a clinician, come find me. I'm here for you. So really impressed with these, accuracy, 93, 97%. Those are really, really nice. So again, that was Dr. Young-Grung-Grunang et al. I bet that's how it's pronounced. Young-Grung-Grunang. Dr. Young-Grung-Grunang, if you're watching this, please tell me I'm pronouncing your name right. And if not, you can gently scold me. That was in 2025 in Scientific Reports. So good stuff. We have some good tools for spotting early dementia, probably where you still have enough time to learn to play music and meditate. Work of Dr. Lazar, I talked about in a video a couple months ago when she was a grad student, and her current work as a PI has produced a lot of papers showing that the amount you meditate every day as it builds up is directly correlated with the ability to sidestep cortical thinning in the frontotemporal tissues, the insula. So, meditate. It will serve you well. But this looks like meditate and then go boogie, or, learn to play an instrument might really be where it's at for getting the most impact. We think sports, we think exercise. All the elders I know, and I tell them this, are being told to put on muscle mass, keep the bone density high. And if you can do it in your 50s and 60s, much better than trying to do it in your 70s and 80s. Your 50s and 60s, when you put deposits in that bank, physiologically, muscle mass, bone density, strength, flexibility, heart health, lung health, oral health, all that stuff, super important in your 50s and 60s because you can't build it back up in your 70s and 80s as well. Well, you guys, thanks for hanging out and chatting with me tonight. That's about all I had to say about these topics. Let me know if you want me to do more of these types in the future. Also, I know some of you guys here are my most rabid followers, or if you're watching later, hi, please feel free to come live too. But I'm working on a few drafts of books. If you guys want me to share early copies, I can. Just let me know you're interested. I'm working on a couple of books, one on sleep hacking specifically, one on procrastination and productivity, actually. So those two kind of go together, where you're hacking the efficiency of your sleep at night and you're hacking the efficiency of your action during the day. And then one on aging as well. So I have these 3 books in draft that I'm working on. I'm probably going to release them in January, February, and March as they're ready. But if any of you are super interested in any of those topics, I'll probably give out a few advanced review copies and get some feedback. So let me know. That offer may go away. So if you contact me and the book's already in publication or getting there, I may not need any readers. So, but it'll be about a month, maybe in November, when I'll be doing that. So you guys can let me know. Damo Vicious, thanks, Andrew. You are welcome, Damo Vicious. Radar Ashwood, we live in exciting times, Doc. Yes, we do. Radar also says, by the way, Doc, the protocol you told me to do on my anterior cingulate felt pretty good. Okay. Wasn't sure where you wanted me to reach out to tell you. Okay, cool. I'm not sure who you are, Radar. I forget. I'm probably not supervising you. If I gave you a protocol, must have been doing a brain map review with you. So usually I do iterative reviews. So I'm glad I gave you a one-off that helped. Demo Vicious, yes, title it How's Your Sleep? Oh, for the book? Okay. Radar, you have written 3 books. WTF, you are more productive than I thought. I already thought you're productive. Well, I'm working on multiple branches of a company. I'm also working on one piece of software that's coming out soon, another one coming out next year. I have 3 books in draft, but one's about 80% done. The sleep one is about 80% done. And yeah, so these are all different things I'm working on. But, this is all I do, so it helps. All right, guys. Well, you have a lovely evening. Take care of those brains. I will talk to you in a week or so. And if you need some support looking at your brain or doing some biohacking, reach out because I do that stuff professionally and I'd love to support you.